Andrei Knight. Welcome to Nature of Reality Radio, and thank you very, very much for giving me your card at the 5D Events event in Vegas this past Easter weekend, and gave me someone to have a guest as on my show this week because I didn't have anyone. You solved that problem right away by giving me your card and saying yes to my radio show solicitation. I appreciate that very, very much. And I'll be using, like I said, your website's Jedi Awakening. That's Jedi with the spelled D-J-E-D-I, the way it was spelled in Egypt, or would be spelled if you were to translate it from the ancient Egyptian language. And also your Tantric Awakening site I have up as well. So I do not recall I did not actually see any of your presentations at the 5D events, although I did see one of your presentations at the other 5D events that was held in the Los Angeles area the year earlier. So I am somewhat familiar with your work in that regard, but you seem to have a lot of different things that are worth discussing. So when it comes to personal alchemy for peak performance, well, there's a lot of different things that alchemy can cover. A lot of people don't even know what alchemy is, and I'll certainly give you the chance to give your take on what the best way to define it is. So but with that being said, Andrei Knight, I guess, introduce yourself. What have you witnessed in your life that caused you to do the stuff that you do? Please be the perfect primary source for the audience, to give the audience a reason to want to listen to you. You got the floor.
Andrew, such a sincere pleasure to be here. When you told me about your radio show in Las Vegas, just sounded fantastic, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to cover some of these topics with you. To sum it up, the experiences that I had in my life that drew me to this, well, first of all, interestingly, since you mentioned the Jedi right at the top, it started with Star Wars. And yes, I'm that old. I remember seeing it as a kid in the movie theater, and those lights dimmed, that spaceship flew overhead, the soundtrack kicked in, and you saw these people moving objects around with their mind, and something just went off inside me, like, this isn't just a movie, this isn't just fiction. My cells remember a time when we used to be able to do this kind of stuff. You know, maybe it's not hocus pocus or supernatural, maybe we just forgot. And my whole life has been a search, really, to find the real life Jedi. And I started out training in martial arts. That seemed like the closest thing. I kept choosing kind of the more spiritually focused martial arts over the more like hard or competitive sport type martial arts. That led me to Zen Buddhist monks in Japan, and I studied with them for a little while, and I learned some of the esoteric arts. I kept studying other historical traditions, and as you mentioned, the Egyptian spelling with a DJ, E-D-I, yes, it's a real thing. I found an order of mystical priest alchemist knights who studied the sciences, chemistry, astronomy, who studied the mystical arts, who studied combat as well to protect their temples, and they called themselves the Jedi. Jed in Egyptian means glowing pillar or pillar of light. We're not talking about the lightsabers here. You know, you've heard talk of Kundalini energy, raising energy up your spine, activating the chakras more and more. Well, is it a stretch of our imagination to think that long ago, when they didn't have the distractions of television and cell phones and this and that, and all they did was meditate all day and cultivate their personal energy and look for energy to strengthen it, that maybe their Kundalini and their chakras would be activated to the point that their spine appears to be glowing? Chakra in Sanskrit literally means spinning wheel of life or spinning wheel of energy. So you get all 7 of them activated up your spine is glowing. There's your Jed. The Jedi were those who walked with the Jed. In other words, walked the path of the Jed, or literally walked around with their Kundalinis fully activated.
Thank you. Had to press the unmute button. I'm going to be on mute every time you're talking. So the Jedi from ancient Egypt, do you by any chance know exactly what time period in ancient Egypt we're talking about? Is this like the time period that mainstream history doesn't want us to know about, or were there actually Jedi in both that history and also the mainstream history that that mainstream science does want us to know about, which has a lot of lies in it, but that's another story. So do you know the time period we're talking about, and can you give us any other information about the Jedi from Egypt, aside from the fact that they were guarding temples?
The exact mention of the Jedi, including their name, is in a document that's currently in the British Museum called the Westcar Papyrus. And this shows up, let me see if I can get a date for you. That's when they mention them by name. But talking about people who practice these arts or had these abilities, they trace their origins even not with the rise of Egypt. There's another order called the Knights that were around in Persia 20,000 years ago. Some of their meditation techniques are exactly the same. They talk about getting their information from Thoth and the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. We know that Thoth was an Egyptian god, but when you read the history further, he might have been an immigrant, a refugee. He's said to be one of the last surviving priests from Atlantis. So it seems like this information migrated to this civilization from a much older civilization. And the people of the Nile Valley, who traditional archaeologists call the Egyptians, themselves record in their writings that when they arrived in the Nile Valley, the pyramids were already there. They settled in the valley. They didn't build the pyramids. The pyramids and the Sphinx both exhibit water erosion marks. And what's interesting is this type of water erosion is definitely salt water. It's not just the Nile overflowing its banks seasonally, as some have suggested. These are saltwater erosion marks because we found pieces of coral and other undersea creatures petrified within the outside of those rocks. So the date of these structures certainly goes much further back than at least traditional archaeology is willing to say, but more and more evidence is being uncovered. And we found pyramids now in Bosnia that are larger and even older than the Egyptian pyramids. There was a debate for a while, are they mountains that just happen to look like pyramids, or are they actual pyramids that got overgrown with vegetation over the millennia, so now they look more like mountains? Well, that debate was settled last year when they scanned the site with ground-penetrating radar and found man-made tunnels underneath. We're finding new tunnels under the Egyptian ones as well. They're much taller than we thought. We're just seeing the peaks of them. They've been buried under the sands of time. So new information is going to come out in the next few years, I think, that's going to really rewrite history for us. To give you a time, they seem to have existed before Egypt, probably around the time the pyramids were built. This information migrated from another continent, another civilization. We have evidence of them right up to the fall of Egypt, right up to the burning of the library in Alexandria. Makes you wonder what kind of knowledge they deemed too dangerous and wanted to destroy, make sure it wasn't passed down. Thankfully, it was passed down. The Templar order, we know the Templar Knights took their names from the Temple of Solomon, but that's perhaps where they took on that name and decided that would be the next cause they would get behind. The arts that they practice, and I've been privileged enough to train with the Templar Knights, are some of the same exercises, some of the same techniques I see reference to in these other places. So it could quite well be that the Jedi Order eventually evolved into the Templar Order, and the knowledge did get passed down, just in another form. They seem to be people, regardless of the region or the culture, they kind of show up parallel to history, and they're always there whenever there's a big shift, big transition. And actually, just as the Star Wars movies imply, they're to maintain balance and kind of help the transitions through these big shifts. They seem to have been with us throughout all of history.
Yes, and their spirit is certainly with us now in many ways, I'm sure. And, talking about martial arts being the closest thing to Jedi, I guess that would make sense, although seeing the Jedi are willing to use violence to escalate violence in some of their battles, is that the best way to do it? Now, I'm familiar with martial arts too, but I use the one martial art that doesn't use violence to escalate violence, which is Aikido. And I've spoken to a lot of other people that do martial arts about what their martial art of choice is, and some of the criticisms I got for why they don't want to do Aikido is because either it's too slow, or one of the common criticisms is many of the attack moves that you see in Aikido are not really attack moves that you see in everyday confrontation. But nonetheless, it is one of the most peaceful martial arts. And not using violence to escalate violence, what can be better than that? I got to ask you, what kind of martial arts do you do? And would you be of the opinion that any martial art could be any more or less better or worse than any other type of martial art?
Well, better or worse depends on your purpose, on your outcome. Taekwondo, we see, is the martial art we see in the Olympics, along with karate. Usually when you see martial arts in movies, this has shifted lately. Like the Batman movies use an Israeli martial art, for example. But traditionally, the older kind of movies, if you think back to them with the high flying kicks and all that, that's usually a variation of Taekwondo. Looks great on camera, looks great for technique and performance to judge your form in a sport. In a real street fight, raising your foot up that high takes a lot of energy. In my martial art, they teach never kick above the knee, or even better, above the ankle. Why waste that energy? If you're going higher, use your hands. So what's good for competition or the camera isn't necessarily good for self-defense. As far as the philosophy of life, and I'm so glad you brought this up, in my martial art, they say if you resort to any of the physical forms, you have already failed. The goal of the martial art is to diffuse any situation with words, with energy, with your own mental state of being. If you get riled up and the other person's angry and coming at you, and you manage to get yourself riled up, you've already failed. Instead of them being influenced by your calm, balanced energy sphere, you've gotten balanced by their highly excited energy field. In my martial art, they divide just about everything into the 4 elements: earth, air, fire, water. So if somebody's coming at you angrily with fire, with a lot of fire energy coming your way, and you choose to respond with fire, well, fire plus fire makes a bigger fire. Air tends to scatter the fire. If somebody wants, your spouse is upset with you because she wants a specific answer to a specific question, you're beating around the bush, you're being all airy and flighty, you're going to spread the fire. Think in terms of earth, think in terms of water. That's a great way to contain fire and respond with that, whether in physical, whether in words, whether in energy, whether in mental. Think in terms of water, send them water. My teacher, and the martial art that I studied, ended up settling on, by the way, was ninjutsu. And when you say ninja, here in the West, we right away think of guys in black masks jumping out of trees. What fascinated me about the ninja is you have stories. They were eventually defeated in all the feudal fighting in Japan in the 1400s. They were eventually defeated, but at the time they were defeated by the emperor and his legion of samurai. The odds were about 100 to 1. So it took 100 lifelong trained samurai to bring down one of these guys. And if you look at the ninja historically, and even the ones practicing it today in Japan, these are short, little guys. They're not big, puffed up, buff guys at all. So how could this be? Clearly there was something there that was more than just physical. Being stronger, punching harder, being faster. That's what got my attention. And like you, as a kid, of course, martial arts, cool, all this fighting, just like the action movies. The more I studied, the more I became interested in the mental side of it. In the beginning, it was like, okay, I have to sit through this meditation. Then we get to the cool stuff. More and more, I realized the mental stuff is the martial art. And like I said, my teacher taught me, if you resort to the physical, you've already lost. That's like a measure of last resort. The whole point is to diffuse the situation with all the other tools available to you. And some of the exercises we practice, to give you an idea of what a mental martial art is, some of the exercises we would practice is a student is blindfolded and stands in the middle of the class. The rest of the class forms a circle around them. And everybody looks at this person and thinks happy, loving thoughts about how much they like their classmates. One person in the room visualizes running up and attacking this person. And your job, you're blindfolded in the middle of the circle, is simply to point your hand in the direction the danger is coming from. We have another exercise where somebody stands behind you, and without touching you, they're holding their hands a few inches away from your back, and mentally they're either pushing or pulling. Your job, without saying a word, you see the key to this is taking the language out of the equation. I'll come back to this in a moment. But your job is to simply take a step forward or a step back, depending on what you're feeling in your back. So it's these kind of exercises designed to extend your senses. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, that sounds really simple. Does that really work? Well, if you practice it every single day for a few years, then yes. Nothing that we're going to discuss today should be thought of as superpowers or paranormal. We all have these abilities, we just don't train them, Andrew. And that's been my whole life mission, is what if there was actually a school and a training program to step by step take you through the same steps that the Jedi used to become the best human you can possibly be. You mentioned at the top of your show, well, what's the application of this? Not all of us are here, defending history and necessarily wanting to walk in the line of ancient warriors, but my goodness, you can start to think how having full command of your own body, your own emotions and emotional responses, instead of being a slave to them, and then cultivating your personal energy to the point that you can affect the world around you. Well, my goodness, that might have some benefits, say, in getting a promotion at your job, starting and growing your own business, making your relationships deeper and stronger, resolving conflicts there, building better relationships for business, for personal, and in general, getting ahead in life. You see, I view like defending yourself and resolving a negative situation or even a health issue. Same thing. You're starting below zero. You're trying to get well or fix the situation, so you're trying to get from a negative number back up to zero. The whole mission of my life is why stop at zero? Let's keep using these techniques and let's keep going and let's see what's above zero. Becoming fully activated human beings. To me, Jedi is not just a martial art. To me, Jedi is about becoming a fully activated human being, and not only so you can get ahead. Imagine the impact you can make in the world around you once you've got yourself taken care of, right? That's the whole idea, is a cumulative movement. Jedi help other people. So you want to become a Jedi, master yourself, master your life, next turn around, help other people become masters of theirs. That's how together collectively we create positive change. And you might be interested to know Masaaki Hatsumi, who was one of my teachers in Japan, along with Stephen K. Hayes here in the United States. Stephen K. Hayes was the first American allowed to go to Japan and be taught these secret arts, the first non-Japanese, and he brought it back to the West in the 80s. Masaaki Hatsumi is his teacher in Japan. Dr. Hatsumi's teacher, Takamatsu Sensei, was actually, he studied right alongside Morihei Ueshiba, who founded Aikido. They were classmates. I thought you'd enjoy that little piece of trivia. And after they studied together, they were lifelong friends, and into their old age, they continued exchanging notes. But basically, Morihei Ueshiba went on to found and develop Aikido. Takamatsu Sensei went on, joined the ninja lineage, and basically he fused what he learned with Morihei Ueshiba with what he learned and was passed down to him from this ancient lineage. So the two are actually not that far removed at all.
Interesting. Now, looking at your bio here, aside from working with in Japan, you also served the Dalai Lama as a protection escort and security advisor, and you were initiated into the Diamond and Lotus tradition of Tendai Mikkyo, a form of esoteric Tantric Buddhism. We'll get to the Tantric stuff in a little bit, but serving the Dalai Lama as a protection escort and security advisor. Now, I can't resist but asking you this. What is the real deal with the Dalai Lama? I mean, you read the books of David Icke, he will assert that the Dalai Lama is in some regards an Illuminati minion who will try to do everything he can to screw around with the minds of Buddhists to make it seem like Buddhism is a good thing, but he'll maintain the illusion that it's a consciousness suppressing thing. And but others assert the Dalai Lama, no, that David Icke's got it mistaken. He has a bad habit of making a conspiracy out of the littlest things, it seems. Dalai Lama really does mean well. He's not a bad guy. He whatever bad things that he's doing is due to manipulation that's, for all intents and purposes, out of his control. So you work with the Dalai Lama. Do you serve as an protection escort and security advisor? What do you see as the real deal with him?
Well, meeting the man, when you stand next to him, and especially somebody like me who can read auras and see and feel energy. If I was to describe the Dalai Lama from an energetic point of view, he reads like a 5-year-old boy. He has this curiosity, this wonder, this sense of not taking anything too seriously. I remember him sitting around and telling jokes, and he tells kind of like really corny jokes, the ones that we remember back from school. But the way he tells them is so, I don't know, loving and so pure. And then, somebody will come up and whisper in his ear, and he's like, oh, I got to go do a press conference. I have to go play king now. I'll be back in a little bit. And his face shifts, and he goes into that role. In his heart, he means well. He is the real deal. He is a spiritual master that I cannot even, on a level I cannot even begin to describe. And his mastery is in many ways in his simplicity. So I have no doubt in my heart that he means well. Lama, by the way, Lama in Tibetan means reincarnated one. It's when we have evidence that this person has lived before, and they end up, every temple has a Lama, a head teacher. So basically the goal is to not forget this knowledge. That's why they start their training very young, and to pass on as much as you can that you've learned from multiple lifetimes. So most of them start schools or head temples. Dalai Lama simply means like the head Lama. He's reincarnated more times than any of the other Lamas. And so the knowledge is there, the mastery is there, and it's interesting that, he travels with ninjas. Those are his closest personal guards. It shows the faith he places in the mental aspects of the martial art. I mentioned all those mental exercises. We're not bigger. We're not stronger. We appear to be faster. We're not really faster either. It's that by developing your mind, you can react before the danger is present. We appear faster because we're already blocking before our opponent decided to throw the punch. That's the idea. We called it thinking 1 second ahead. That's what we really developed, and that's why we make such good protection escorts. As far as Buddhism, I've studied as many ancient traditions as I can get my hands on. Buddhism was my first introduction to any kind of formalized spiritual training, but I didn't stop there. I've studied with Native American medicine men, with the Templars. I got a really good grounding in not only Christian history and mysticism, but also Jewish and Muslim as well. They actually very intimately study all three of what I would label the modern religions. I've studied everything I could about Egypt, everything I could learn about the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Babylonian tradition, anything I can get my hands on. And what I can tell you and your listeners, Andrew, and this goes, since you brought up conspiracy, this goes for government agencies too. So we're talking Christianity, we're talking Buddhism, we're talking the CIA, we're talking NASA and the space program. Both religion and government alike, almost every organization I know beyond a doubt now has factions. Here again, almost like Star Wars, a light side and a dark side. So Buddhism is a religion like any other. They started out trying to convey spiritual teachings. Eventually, a church and a priesthood formed around the teachings. And once you have an organization, a priesthood, a book, and a church, then you have a system. And it becomes more about maintaining the system than necessarily passing on the knowledge in its purest forms. We start editing out the knowledge that is not useful to preserving the system and adding in a few words that kind of, convey the idea of be loyal to the system and don't look outside of it. Why? Because priests, like anybody else, want to stay employed, and they want to make sure their children will stay employed in the next generation. So any system, government or religion, over time becomes about preserving the system. There are ancient teachings of the Essenes and the Gnostics that would seem to a modern Christian like black magic and spook them. You know what I mean? Jesus himself was not really a Christian. Christianity grew up after his time. Jesus studied with the Gnostics and the Essenes, who, by the way, could very well be the in-between step between Egypt and the Templars. That's the area I'm currently researching and trying to see if there's parallels there. There's reason to believe the three wise men who came from Egypt might have been Jedi. A baby with exceptional abilities or circumstances is born. Let's check him out. You know, people said when Phantom Menace came out, oh, Star Wars borrowed too much from the Bible for my taste. Well, no, maybe the Bible borrowed from much older legends that we have. Maybe it's the other way around. So Buddhism, like any religion, if Buddhism was truly evolved, I don't think they would be separating women from men and still have those hang-ups about sexuality. Women tend to be more intuitive and more spiritual than men. They can understand this stuff faster and on a deeper level and then help teach it to us. You know, so a lot of these religions that suppress women are really stunting their own growth. That doesn't mean we should ignore all the other wisdoms and teachings of Buddhism. With any tradition, I would say study and soak up as much as you can. Your heart will tell you what is useful and what was kind of added and written in after the fact. We know the Bible was revised twice. It was revised lots of times, but it went through two major periods of revision. The original Bible was written in Aramaic, which is the language that eventually evolved into Hebrew, but has a lot of differences from Hebrew, just like Old English. If you read Old English, like the original version of Beowulf, it reads a lot more like German than it does English, yet we call it Old English. So Aramaic has similarities to Hebrew, has a lot of differences from Hebrew, but because the languages are so different, once it was translated from Aramaic to Hebrew and again from Hebrew into Greek, the Greek version, which eventually was studied for the King James version, the first English version, is very different from the Aramaic version. And if it's of interest, I can give you some examples. Then it was translated again during the Council of Nicaea. This isn't a maybe, is not an if. It's recorded in history. The Romans got together at the Council of Nicaea in 328 AD and literally rewrote the Bible. Well, we've been trying for 300 years since we killed Jesus to suppress this new growing movement. We can't suppress it. It's growing in popularity. We should make it the official state religion, but let's make sure there's nothing in there that speaks contrary to the state, like most of Jesus' teachings actually did. But let's take anything like that out and let's put in a few things that say that, you know, stay loyal to the state. Don't look outside of it. Serve the system. And the modern forms of all of these traditions that are handed down to us, if you really read them with an open heart, you will hear two voices talking. And it's your job to kind of feel when the voices switch and which one is the real esoteric knowledge and which is like the stuff that was written in by the churches and the government after the fact to serve their own agendas and purposes. You will feel it. But I would never say, like, you know, a lot of people that tend to be mystical, they say, well, Christianity is a fake religion. A lot of Christians will say, oh, that New Age stuff, you know, that's heresy. They all have wisdoms to teach us. They've been passed down through time for a reason. We just have to kind of read in between the cracks. And they say the best way to hide esoteric knowledge is right out in the open. You just pad it with stuff to make it safe, so only the ones who have studied in a school, it's not to keep it from you, okay? It's to study in the school, you learn the other skills that allow you to make use of the knowledge. And you learn to be a better person, so you make better decisions, so you're more likely to use that knowledge for good. You see? They make sure that only the ones that have gotten the full training have the skills to decipher the real knowledge, to read between the lines, as it was. But all traditions, all religions, and even within our own government, all organizations, if I've learned one thing, it's that there's always a good faction serving a good agenda and a bad faction serving a bad agenda. And let's not even call it good or bad or good and evil. There's always two energies, because that's oversimplifying. There's always two energies in the universe, opposing forces, yin and yang. Without it, you wouldn't have push and pull, you wouldn't have movement, and things would stay the same. and time would stand still. It was really interesting. The movie Lucy, a lot of people hated the ending, but go back and watch her last speech and listen carefully, because she talks about time adds movement to space. Without time, space is stationary. So you need that fourth element of time. It's really brilliant. It says matter wouldn't exist without time because you would have no way of perceiving it. If you are in one instant, you are inside of it. Time is what lets you to step outside of it and study it and perceive it. And same could be said of higher dimensions as you move on as well. Where I was going with that, the two opposing forces, we need movement to exist. We need push and pull to create movement. Rather than thinking of it as good and evil, the analogy I really like, and it's just an analogy, they say any map is not the territory, but a much more accurate analogy, I think, is love and abundance on one side. This is the yang. This is the, I have too much, so I'm giving some away. And then the yin, the other side, would be fear and lack. I don't have enough. Fear and lack are I would say, the negative manifestations of it, but let's not think in terms of positive and negative. Let's think of, I need more, so I'm pulling towards me. So you talk about some of these entities like the Greys, the Draconians, the Archons, they feed on us, they suck our energy. It's been said they have more superior technology, but they have no connection to the spiritual. They have no energy, they're hollow there, so they need to pull energy from others. That's not evil, they're trying to survive. What did you eat for dinner last night? Oh, but I'm a vegan. So you killed a plant life form. Either way, you're consuming some life to stay alive. They're doing the same thing, except they need energy because they can't produce their own. We need proteins and enzymes because we can't produce our own. We need the raw materials, So they're consuming the raw materials that they can't produce on their own. But they're producing technology. They're producing other things. All living things bring something in and put something out. And this is your push and pull. And those are the two opposing forces. So why do we have governments? Why do we have conspiracies? Well, we have fear of the people who live across the ocean, you see. We also have love and abundance. We give aid to a lot of countries. We have non-governmental organizations. So in everything that you look at, it's not really good and evil. There's always a push and pull, a give and take going on. So start to pay attention to those forces and how they work in your life.
Yeah, no question. But since you mentioned that, do you agree or disagree with the statement made by Lily Earthling Kosalova, who says that the yin-yang symbol and other symbols that have a duality basis it's not in our best interest to focus on them. I mean, there's nothing wrong with using them, but focusing and obsessing about them too much can be a bit of a hindrance simply because they have a duality aspect to them. Other people who hear that, like Eddie Craig, the Tao of Law guy, Rule of Law Radio, he is a big fan of Bruce Lee, and he uses the yin yang symbol as the symbol for Tao of Law. I should say, yeah, it's pronounced Tao, not Tao. And I decided just for the hell of it, you think maybe this is a bad idea to make the yin yang symbol the symbol for Tao of Law because it's a duality symbol? And his response was, not everything's a conspiracy. Although he's not really the best to ask that because, I mean, he's great fighting in the courtroom, but he's very left-brained and closed-minded. No offense. He doesn't really believe in anything metaphysical or spirituality-based. With all due respect, I think he's making a big mistake there. But anyhow, I think he's right in his assertion that I shouldn't worry about the yin-yang being a duality-based symbol. So do you think Lily Earthling is kind of looking at that the wrong way?
No. He's looking at half of it. Like you said, he's more left brain than right brain. And some people are more right brain than left brain. And that's all good because we need some of each. Here again, yin and yang, right? The original temples, I'm told, the original Taoist temples, when they had the yin and yang over the door, it was spinning. Remember, China is where the clock was invented. It was originally invented, by the way, to time the emperor's mistresses so the next one would know when to go in, giving him plenty of time to rest and recover in between. Just a little tidbit of trivia there. But the yin and yang used to have a clock-type mechanism behind it, and it would be rotating. The Buddha himself said that the ultimate goal of enlightenment is to transcend the illusion of duality. When they talk about Maya, they talk about this great illusion. They're talking about the illusion of duality, this myth that you stop where your skin does, that we are all separate individuals, that we are separate from the circumstances happening to us, that we are a separate thing from the universe itself that we are attempting to study. That is the illusion, the separation, the duality. The yin and yang is a model for the duality we feel between us and our environment, really. The original temples, it was spinning. It was not stationary. They were moving around each other and with each other. Remember, the duality exists to create movement. But you spin that thing fast enough and you're looking at a gray circle. The symbol of Aikido, by the way, is a circle. But the whole idea is to transcend the duality. That is, again, a model, a tool for a certain layer. You might have seen the hashtag, "We have already won." A lot of these groups that are starting to wake up communicate to themselves right out in the open, just in ways that you will recognize intuitively when you see it, and it will speak to you. But it's right there in the open. So there's this hashtag, "We have already won." And I've done some meditating, intuiting, channeling into this area specifically to see what it means. And I also had a dear friend, she's passed now, but she used to work for the government as an auditor. As you can imagine, she didn't make many friends in her line of work as a financial auditor looking for misuse of funds. She got into some information, and she was kind enough to share some information. So some of what I share is pretty direct and firsthand. We know the government has remote viewer programs. I've been approached by them, and they've attempted to recruit me. Actually, I politely declined their offer because I felt I could do more good outside of any organization, specifically one with so many bounds and restrictions. But I know firsthand from when I was approached by their recruiter, even he said, I said, am I joining some worldwide global conspiracy? Which side would I be serving? He's like, "We are good people trying to do the good thing." He was the one that told me. But almost every government organization has faction. We don't represent the whole CIA. But I can tell you we are good people trying to do the right thing and save lives. Anyway.
I have no doubt you are. And, okay. I thought you were done there, but continue.
Go ahead if you had something to add.
Oh, I certainly do. I can't help but ask. It says here on your bio, which I will, of course, put in the YouTube video when I upload it, bridging the wisdoms of both the East and the West, Andrei holds a PhD in metaphysics and is certified as a professional life coach by Fowler Wainwright International, as well as a neuro-linguistic programming therapist. The interesting thing I see here, PhD in metaphysics. How is that possible when colleges are supposed to be brainwashing institutions and will have nothing to do, you would think, with metaphysics?
That's why I went to study in a church in a monastery instead of a college, because they do. The Templars maintain some of their own monasteries where you can study in the esoteric arts, and we all need a piece of paper to get somewhere in this world. I've heard a lot of people say college, really, it gives you very general skills to kind of fit into the mold and live perhaps a comfortable but a very general life. And, colleges and universities may be worked in the past, but is that really where we want our kids to go? And I'm not knocking colleges. It really depends on the career you choose, right? Try to become a lawyer without a college degree. Try to get into law school. You got to pick your track and follow that path. No path is better or worse than another. Pick the path you're meant to walk. For my path, I couldn't get the education, as you mentioned, in a college, so I found another means. And one nice thing about the Templars is they recognize the importance of pieces of paper to get ahead in life, to do the work you want to do. So they issue their own. You don't have to necessarily go to a college for that. So, my interest was spirituality and religion, and I decided why ignore the three that have grown to be the most relevant today. They wouldn't have done so if there wasn't something to be learned from them. So I went and studied in a monastery. The Templar Knights are not just warriors, they are also priests.
Yes, I see that, and that's the next thing on your bio here. You were introduced into the Order of the Hereditary Knights Templars of Britannia. Now, I criticize David Icke for making conspiracy out of anything, and that's basically what I'm going to do right now. The thing about, like you mentioned, Freemasons, Knights Templar, and David Icke's the kind of guy who would say, well, they have a conspiracy connection, so that's what I'm going to choose to obsess about. Well, a 32nd degree Freemason, Donnie Gilson, when I had him on my show, he made it very loud and clear that Freemasons are by nature, are not an Illuminati organization. They have been infiltrated by the Illuminati, and any bad intentions, the things that they do, are only a result of that infiltration. Is that generally the same with the Knights Templars of Britannia? And how can you be sure that the one that you are introduced into is not one that's been infiltrated?
I can.
Oh, okay.
I went there for knowledge. I don't drink Kool-Aid. I don't join any clubs or cults. I'm not that kind of guy. I go and I learn, with the Buddhists too. I actually had my head shaved and I was going to take the vows and enroll in the monastery. I went there just for a training program. But I was thinking of joining their monastery, even went as far as shave my head. And the night before, I'm sitting there with one of the teachers, and he's like, Andrei, how many monks do you think there are in the world? I'm like, I don't know. How do you estimate something like that? A couple million, depends which religions you're counting, a few million maybe. He's like, and what do they do all day? They sit there and they pray for change. I'm like, yeah, I guess, but, collective energy. I don't think that's wasting your time. There's value to that. But he's, to go on, he's like, okay, so there's millions of monks out there praying every day for change, and you want to join them and be one of the millions when you could go out there and be the answer to their prayers. And that's probably the politest way I've ever been kicked out of any organization. Maybe they didn't want a gaijin, a foreigner, studying with them. I don't know. But I went back to my room and packed my bags and left the next morning. And that's kind of been the story of my life. When I studied with the Native American medicine man, he offered for me to do the Sundance and to undergo the rite and dance with the buffalo skull and become a full-fledged medicine man. But when I meditated on it, I realized my path was not to be a medicine man. It was to learn what I could from the medicine men. It was to learn what I could from the Buddhist monks. I didn't take my vows. I'm not a priest. I'm not celibate. It would be hard for me to do that and go on to the next leg of my journey and study Tantra. I didn't take the vows. I took the PhD. So same it is with the Templars. Like all conspiracy buffs, I just wanted to get my hands on some information. And we could sit and debate conspiracies back and forth online, but hey, these fellows are offering me a chance to study from their archives directly. Why would I say no to something like that? How can I teach this stuff openly? Well, because I didn't drink their Kool-Aid either. I took their knowledge. I do wear their ring with pride because I feel a lot of pride for their tradition and everything they've done. But yeah, how do you know that your particular branch or sect hasn't been infiltrated? Here again, your heart. Any text you read, and it doesn't matter the Bible, Templar text, the Egyptian papyruses, I'm always seeing and hearing these two voices. The Illuminati too. They originally started to stand against the church. They were the rational beings who believed you shouldn't be burning people at the stake just because they think differently. They started out with noble causes. Like anyone, they became infiltrated. And like anyone, it doesn't matter, CIA, Illuminati. Everybody who thinks they're a puppet master has someone else pulling their strings. If you go to David Icke, we now know these, the Draconians are but puppets of the Archons. And these Archons don't even have corporeal bodies. They're energy beings that act on this dimension from an outside dimension. And I'm sure there's a dimension outside of theirs. You can keep going up in layers and layers and layers till you eventually transcend the duality and you get to unity, you get to the one, you get to source. And this brings me back to this hashtag, we have already won. What I know about the remote viewer program, it's still active. It didn't stop with the men who stare at goats, if you remember that movie. It's still active and funded to this day. I talked face-to-face with one of their recruiters, I know they exist, and they wouldn't still be funded to this day if they weren't getting results. They're not just spying on the Russians. They very actively are trying to find other people waking up and developing abilities so they can recruit them, so they can keep tabs on them. And they are also very actively looking across time. You can travel through time just like you can travel through space. Remote viewing. Past lives. People ask me, are past lives real? Well, we talked about lamas and Dalai Lama, so yeah, I definitely accept the concept of past lives. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. Science and religion agree here. I just had to take issue with the word past. What makes you think they're over? That's a very limited view of time, because your senses, here again, the illusion, the Maya, your senses have gotten used to seeing and existing in one point of space-time at a time. But your limited view is not necessarily the whole. Past lives are still ongoing. I visit mine all the time anytime I need new information. So they have remote viewers that can gather information from the past, that can also gather information from the future. And you might have heard talk of the multiple timelines, and people are saying now that there are 3 that are more prevalent than any of the other timelines. In other words, the most likely to be the one that we travel down. The CIA has reportedly sent remote viewers down all 3 of the most prevalent timelines, and there is no scenario where they win, where the cabal stays in power. But that does not mean they have already lost. And that's why you've been seeing the disclosure, and you've been seeing some of the shift. And some of the disclosure is useful and true information, and some is utter gibberish. Here again, if you listen with your heart, you will know which is which, because there is a lot of disinformation being fed out there with disclosure as well. Where was I going with this? They see it as a loss, and they are now shifting their strategy rather than trying to win, to dragging out the decline and softening the landing for themselves. There's been a marked shift within the last 2 years, and this is why. There is none of the 3 prevalent timelines have them winning. But what they don't understand, because they are still coming from scarcity and lack, they are still coming from an us and them duality viewpoint, is that when the Great Awakening happens, when the next shift happens, we all go. There is no more us and them. That's why they don't win. There's no way they can win in such a scenario. But they also do not lose if we take them with us. Everybody's got to evolve. That's the next big shift, the transcending of duality.
And it's up to you and me to continue doing things like that. And kudos to David Said for the 5D Events Conference to gather us together, although he did acknowledge to me that it was kind of foolish to schedule on Easter weekend, as that appeared to throw a monkey wrench into the attendance factor for the conference. But still, the presentations and the information given out was totally worthwhile, and the full moon energy. And also, we were having some big solar blasts coming from the sun. Kudos to Nikki Sutton for talking about that on her YouTube channel, going on at the same time as the conference. So, in a sense, it was a good thing to schedule it then, but a bad thing because of Easter. But let's not talk about that anymore. Let's move on to some other things, and want to talk about some of the whole. What do you want to say? What do you say?
Well, I just wanted to say that, yeah, the attendance was left something to be desired, but I was just blown away by the speakers and the quality of content there. It was amazing stuff, and I'm told they got most, if not all of it, on video, and in the coming days they will be posting it on the 5D Events website and YouTube channel. So if you guys missed it, there is a way to at least see some of the lectures. I don't know what they're selling versus giving away, but I did hear talk of a lot of the recordings being posted online.
Right, and this is not to be confused with In 5D Events. That's Greg Prescott. This is 5D Events, David Said, or is it Said David? Yeah. Whatever. But moving on to the esoteric occult stuff about religions, you mentioned something earlier about Buddhism, and it does cause some conflict or issues with gender separation. Akashic Records reader Andrew Bartzis, I remember him saying that not counting New Age, Buddhism is the religion that is the most metaphysically accurate, but in the end they got it wrong, although I'm drawing a blank on his explanation for why they got it wrong. Would you by any chance know what it is, and would it have something to do with the fact that it does something with the gender, the masculine, feminine separation or conflict or whatever?
They got it right for a yin and yang dualistic reality that was the prevalent reality for the time they were teaching the teachings in. They missed the transcending of duality, the next step. There's the story of the second enlightenment of Buddha. I don't know if you've heard this one. So Buddha's sitting under his tree, a Bodhi seed falls on his head, he looks at the seed, he looks out at the forest in front of him, and he realizes the entire forest can come from this one seed, and through that he has his moment of enlightenment. And then he realizes that if duality is an illusion, and all is really one, he cannot truly be enlightened as long as there's one unenlightened soul still left. So he spends the next 40 years of his life teaching. That is the thing. What they were attempting to convey, the information as best as they could for the people they were teaching to, for the level they were at the time. Sanskrit actually has many layers between where you are now, asleep, which translates literally as asleep, by the way. They also asked Buddha, what are you? Are you a man or a god? He said, I'm simply awake. Meaning neither, meaning both, meaning I don't see the separation, the point of the question. I'm just more awake than you. We wake up in the morning, oh, that was a neat dream. I could fly there, I had magic powers there, but now I'm awake. Well, no, you've just woken up to another layer of dream, and there are other layers, and my goodness, once you figure that out and can work with the energies at this layer of the dream, well, you can do lucid living just as easily as lucid dreaming, and why not fly in this level of reality too? Our minds haven't gotten there yet. We still believe it's impossible, which is why it is. The double slit experiment. The outcome always matches the expectations of the observer. We know the universe behaves this way at the particle level. So, trying to tie this back to your original question,
yeah, that was
tell me
what
your
the
original.
Buddhists have it wrong, and I think you actually answered
Oh,
it.
what they got wrong? Yeah.
And you answered it. You said
So,
it has to do with transcending the consciousness, something about going past the yin yang.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where they missed.
Right.
Okay.
The duality worked for the current layer of reality that we find ourselves in. And it made sense to separate gender because we get all hot and bothered and we get all sexual around the opposite sex. And this is why all religions have an issue with it. In Buddhism, the men and the women study separately in almost every religion. In yoga, we talk about raising kundalini up your spine. We don't talk about the second kundalini energy that comes down your spine, right? There are always two snakes, not one, if you look at the staff of Hermes. This is where we now get into Tantra, the one religion that doesn't shy away from sexuality, that doesn't shy away from working with the polarity of energies instead of trying to isolate and work with each energy in isolation. And this was actually a part of every religion. It's such a sensitive hang-up for us. And some say, in the conspiracy point of view is that it was done for a reason, because sexuality is the fastest way to enlightenment, or at least to liberation, which is the next step along the way, liberation from this illusion. Sexuality is the fastest way there. But remember, the church's goal is not your enlightenment. The church's goal is preservation of the church and the teachings for the next generation. This is why the Templar Knights this is a timely point to have this conversation, because Notre Dame just burned. Notre Dame was actually built by the Templar Knights, and Notre Dame, translated into English, means Our Lady, Dame. The Templar Knights built Notre Dame in honor of Mary Magdalene. Ironically, in 1310, 54 Templar Knights were also burned at the stake in front of its front steps. First, they fought the Crusades in the name of the church. They thought at the time the Pope was the most worthy cause to get behind. First it was Egypt, then it was Babylon. It seemed like the Pope was the force of good and balance in the universe, or in the world at that point in history, when we were coming out of the Dark Ages. But the Templar Knights returned from the Crusades having served the Pope, and the Pope says, bow on one knee and swear that you serve me and swear that you serve the church. And the Templar Knights said, wait a minute, we're not here to serve a man. We thought we were both serving the same thing and both on the right side of history together. We're not here to serve you, sir. And the Pope promptly had them all executed, which the King of France was very happy to carry out because he owed the Templars a bunch of money, and he saw it as a good way to get out of his debt. So ironically, the Templar Knights were burned in front of the very church that they themselves built in honor of Our Lady, Mary Magdalene. If you recall the movie The Da Vinci Code, which probably delved into the Templar teachings deeper than any other film, at least that segment of the Templar teachings, I would say Star Wars, The Matrix, Jupiter Ascending, all put together, give you a much accurate representation of the rest of it. But speaking specifically with that period of time, why did they choose to honor Mary Magdalene? Da Vinci Code got everything right. The Holy Grail, you see, it's human beings, they're out there, they're searching for this treasure. It's got to be gold, it's got to be gold. They were right about the Holy Grail not being a cup. There's treasure beyond money that's worth more than money. The Holy Grail refers to the womb of Mary Magdalene. Yes, she was pregnant. Yes, that bloodline, as well as the bloodlines of Moses, Abraham, Muhammad, all continue to this day. The one part that they left out was that it was not Jesus's bloodline that's of primary interest. It's Mary Magdalene. Jesus wasn't nobody. He was very carefully selected and vetted for her to be a companion. This is why the three wise men came, but it was actually about her and her bloodline all along. The miracles that Jesus is depicted as performing in the Bible are things he learned to do from her. They were practicing Tantra. They were practicing sex magic, and that's really hard for a lot of Christians to swallow because they've made sex such a sin in their world. Sin, the original definition of sin, Jordan Maxwell taught me a lot about the origin of words. Sin means to miss the target. It's a term that comes from archery. You can hit the bullseye, you can hit just to the side of the bullseye somewhere on the side of the target, or you can fly right over the target itself, and that's called sinning. The only sin, the original sin, is not to reach your full potential, your full capability. Not to touch someone in some way with consent that elevates both people's energy to the point that you feel it surging through your body. This was just considered too dangerous a knowledge at a time when the Romans wanted to solidify their grip on the empire. So this knowledge was surpassed. The church is not interested in your enlightenment. The church is interested in you remaining a church member. Once you achieve enlightenment, you don't really need the church and the priesthood, you see. So a lot of knowledge was deemed too dangerous and not passed down. And you mentioned at the top of the show that I didn't even know at the time that I was studying Tantra. It was only a few years ago that I'm like, Mikkyo Tendai Buddhism, what does that actually mean? I know the name of my tradition, but what are its roots? What does it mean? And I got this not from some esoteric scroll. I got this from Wikipedia. It says an esoteric tantric sect of Buddhism. I'm like, well, that makes sense. That's why I was drawn there. It's esoteric. It deals with the hidden teachings. The hidden teachings are magic. What is magic? It's not something supernatural. It's learning to use your personal energy and working with the energy in the world around you in concert instead of in opposition. That's all there is to magic. It's energy work. Tantra is energy work. It just doesn't ignore the second chakra. That's the only difference. Sexual energy is the energy we work with. It's just that we have 6 other chakras as well. We don't have to keep it down there, in the genitals. And words like down there, let's make it a dirty, shameful thing so we don't spend a lot of time looking there. It's just for reproduction was the old view. Don't have sex unless you're married, unless you're intending to produce a kid. That worked for the world and our state of evolution where we were at the time. And for centuries, sexuality was repressed, so your focus could be on religion and not be distracted by women and their allure, Then we had the sexual revolution of the 60s, which in some ways was very good, in some ways was very detrimental. This could be one of those engineered disclosures, just like some of what we might be going through now. They kind of said, okay, you want sex, we can't suppress it anymore. Pandora's box is open. Here you go, have sex. And we got the porn movement of the 70s and 80s. And suddenly sex became all about the skin, all about the physical sensation, all about the pleasure. So now we've got reproduction and we've got pleasure, but we're still not delving deeper into the deeper energy work that you can do using sexual energy, you see? So in many ways it became not a liberation, but now a distraction into a new religion. Now we're sexually free. We have sex with everyone we want. And we're doing all of this sex, but we're doing it just to pleasure ourselves. And we've satisfied a need and stayed at that level and kind of lost the desire to go deeper and look deeper. All religions used to have a tantric element, even Christianity. Mary Magdalene's bloodline is important because she wasn't a prostitute. She was a high priestess in the temple of Isis, which taught women the sexual energetic arts. She more than likely took prostitutes off the street to train them, to use their abilities for something better. A friend of mine just wrote a book, David Young, about Mary Magdalene. And he said that he wanted to get his facts right. He consulted 6 different leading Bible scholars. And he asked them, for the chapter and the number, where does it say that Mary Magdalene is a prostitute? Where in the Bible? None of them could come up with it. In other words, it's not in the Bible. That's how the priests teaching it interpret what it said in the Bible. But it's nowhere in the Bible actually written that she was a prostitute. Some say she was a high priestess in the temple of Isis. Some say she was high priestess because she's a descendant of Isis herself. Here again, bloodline. It's not just learning the knowledge. If you have some inherent genetic tie to it, where you've studied it in the past already, we can accelerate that progress, just like the lamas of Tibet. Let's get the wisdom of multiple lifetimes. This is what it's about. There are some royal families, obviously family and privilege and nepotism and all this, but in some cases, it's just to accelerate the teachings. Why lose a generation's worth of work in progress, or several generations' work? That's why the Templars monitor and act as bodyguards to some of these people to protect their teachings through time so they can serve the next generation. That's the real purpose of the Templars. There might be sects with their own agendas and their own purposes, but that's the Templars. The Freemasons aren't really tied to the Templar Knights. There's a lot of honor between the two groups. We might not necessarily approve of everything the Freemasons are doing, but we can honor and acknowledge someone who has dedicated their life to working on themselves. We can see the commonality in the brotherhood and that, but they're really 2 organizations that grew up in parallel. They're not to be used interchangeably. I've been told, and I'm not putting Freemasons down, I'm friends with a few Freemasons, and they're very dear friends, and they're sincere people trying to be better people, just like a lot of us. But some say that the Freemasons were founded by people who tried to join the Templars. And I'm not saying anything about any modern-day Templars, just those guys. They tried to join the Templars. They weren't allowed in. They weren't deemed of either having made enough spiritual progress or enough moral character to use the knowledge freely, so they were denied entry to the Freemasons. So they've kind of formed their own club based around the same teachings. They started in parallel and kind of, went their own way. But that doesn't mean there's a lot of, we had the movie Wild Wild Country that shows you how bad of a man Osho was. Well, in the end, he got into drugs. Hollywood money became involved, and he got into drugs. And maybe he didn't make the best decisions. But okay, what about the 30 years that he had an ashram in India before that? And students of his students, the millions of people that his teachings have helped. What about all that? Everywhere you look, you will always see the good and the bad. This seems to be a recurring theme in a lot of the topics we touch, but it's true. Don't invalidate the teachings, because of some things the teacher is said to have done. Freemasons do a lot of good. They're involved in a lot of conspiracy. Illuminati, comes up when people think of conspiracies. They were started for noble causes. You'll find that in every organization, and I'm sure the Templars as well. What I was taught our mission was, and the assignments that I was handed in the time that I was active, was to protect people whose bloodlines were thought to be significant in the spiritual evolution of the planet, to make sure that those teachings can be used for that purpose. So that's what the Templar Knights exist to do, and I believe the Jedi before them existed to do as well.
All right, and if you cannot answer this question because of you have a sworn to secrecy oath with them, then forget I asked. But out of curiosity, the History Channel documentary, one of the few good things the History Channel seems to have done, aside from Ancient Aliens and the UFO programs that are waking people up. Another one was Holy Grail in America from back in the day, talking about the Knights Templar and the Kensington Runestone in Kensington, Minnesota. But dug up by this guy named Olaf that had the date 1362 and appeared to have connections to the Knights Templar. They also went as far as saying Christopher Columbus. He definitely had connections to the Knights Templar, and his the hooked X in his signature is the dead giveaway there. And David Icke, again, he's always said Columbus was not trying to reach China or India. He knew the Western Hemisphere continents of North and South America were there all along, and he also supports the theory of the Knights Templar coming to America before Columbus did, and Columbus, the 1492 voyage and the ones after that, all going to India and China just a cover story to conceal the fact he was going to further the Babylonian Brotherhood Illuminati Empire to the Western Hemisphere at that point in time. So, do you have anything to say about this, about those connections to the Knights Templar and their occult history, or do you have to keep silent about this?
I don't have to keep silent, Andrew. I also took a vow to do everything I can and to devote my life to the protection of ancient knowledge, but also to applying it to assist and accelerate the ascension and awakening of humanity. And where those two vows might come into conflict with each other, I choose to err on the side of accelerating the awakening of humanity. Just like the Knights Templars themselves had the courage to split from the Pope that they vowed to serve when they saw the two needs in conflict. I swore to serve the greater good. The greater good, to me, is to put this knowledge out there. I'm not splitting from the order. I am following my mission as handed to me by the order, which is to assist and accelerate the awakening of humanity. I personally feel, and it's not just the Knights Templars, I've been contacted by some Buddhist monasteries as well, saying the way I'm putting this information out is reckless. I have shortcuts. I have techniques that'll take you in 10 to 30 minutes to the same state that a Zen monk achieved after 30 to 40 years meditating in a monastery. You can do that your first day in 10 to 30 minutes. Our tools have evolved. I'm putting them out there openly because I have faith in human nature and the soul and spirit of humanity. But people are like, but look, we're so brutal and wars and how we treat each other and how we treat animals. Yes, at our present state of evolution. But I have faith that my knowledge will lead us to the next state of evolution, and those beings will, their nature will be to use the information properly. So my view is I'm not splitting from the order at all. I am exactly doing what I vowed to do. Whereas Christopher Columbus, I don't think that's a conspiracy. He flew the Templar cross right on his sails. he wasn't trying to be shy or subtle about it at all. It's the academics that have to debate because it keeps them employed. He flew it right on his sails. He got funding from the Spanish Inquisition, don't forget, who were very religiously pious. Like any entrepreneur or businessman today, if you want to get funding, you have to present your package in a way that's acceptable to the morals and the goals and the agendas of the people who are funding you. But yes, he knew the Americas existed. He was going there on Templar business. He needed somebody to finance the trip.
Thank you. And let's some more occult history. Switching gears. What was that sound in the background? Oh, you there? Hello?
Just 1 second.
Yeah, I heard something. I'm still connected to your line. Are you?
Hi. Sorry, technical difficulty there.
Yeah, I heard some lady or something in the background. But all right, back to the program. Some more occult history, specifically about Christianity. I remember you mentioning about the Romans in like the 2nd century. No, wait, the 4th century, I should say. Changing the wording of the Bible. Now, David Icke, in his books I've read, he's talked about a specific, not a major or a minor Illuminati family, sort of like a run-of-the-mill Illuminati family, the Piso family of Italy. He gives them a lot of credit for having created the story, the greatest story ever told, that is the Bible, and putting a lot of the bogus stuff in there that is bogus stuff that deserves to be called bogus stuff. They're the ones responsible for it, more so than the Romans who you speak of. So can you comment on that, and can you maybe give us a little timeline history of when the Bible was written, when it first began, and what is the timeline history up until the present day, the hotspot points in time of how it got changed and into the brainwashing thing that it is now, and not the owner's manual that it could be to serve a good cause.
There have been many points, Andrew, and you're very right. The prominent families, it wasn't just the Piso family, though they played a very big role. Also, the Medicis, who had several popes from their family. You had it. Italy was definitely a hotspot. I mean, Rome, right? You had families that were deeply tied to the church, and you had merchant families that were deeply tied to business and commerce, and both wanted to preserve, well, their family wealth and their interests. And they had a lot of hand in revising the Bible. The Council of Nicaea was one major revision. It also depends which Bible you're referring to. I assume you mean the New Testament. The New Testament started out with the disciples recording their lessons with Jesus. Just like in modern day, Osho is credited with 600 books, and I'm told he never wrote a word. This was his students sitting in his sermons, taking notes, organizing their notes, and eventually, this was published as books as his teaching. It was the same in Jesus' time. So the New Testament started out as the Gospels, the notes taken by his students. That's why we have chapters such as John and Matthew and Paul. In the Coptic jars where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, we found some other interesting things along with them. We found the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. She was also a disciple, let's not forget. She had her own version of events that she wrote down, and it is all Tantra. It is all sex magic. When I say that she was teaching Jesus sex magic, this is not speculation. She wrote this down. and now we found it. It was hidden perhaps purposefully, but it wasn't around at the time that the Council of Nicaea decided what to include, what to exclude from the Bible. But we found it now. We found the Gospel of Thomas, which is a training manual for how to become a Christ. Christ is not a last name. Christ is a title. It means direct connection to the crystalline consciousness. You've heard of indigo children. You've heard of rainbow children. And now we've got this new generation coming in that are even more powerful, born with even more knowledge. We call them the crystalline consciousness kids. That's what Jesus was. He was just born 2,000 years ahead of his time. That's what Christ means, this crystalline Christ consciousness. The Gospel of Thomas is a step-by-step manual for achieving Christ consciousness. The words of the church and the empire and these royal rich families is serve us, serve our system. That's the best way to be the best Christian. Serve our system. And that's how you can differentiate the two voices. What Jesus was teaching at his time was not worship me, not only through me, become like me. And the Gospel of Thomas is a step-by-step manual for how to do that. We have recently found another one, the Gospel of Barnabas. This just turned out, and it was found in an ancient monastery in Turkey. It was between two unmarked leather covers, and nobody knew what it was because nobody's opened it in a few hundred years. We opened it up. Well, what's in this book? Lo and behold, it's the Gospel of Barnabas. And in there, Barnabas quotes Jesus as saying, beware Paul the deceiver. Jesus intuitively didn't trust one of his disciples, and it wasn't Judas. It was Paul. Paul, of course, went on to found the church in Jesus' name. Paul did not like women. Maybe he wasn't lucky in love. Maybe he was abused for his mother. But for whatever reason, he didn't trust women. He thought women were a distraction from religion. Maybe he didn't approve some of the practices that Jesus and Mary were practicing. But for whatever reason, he did not like and trust feminine energy. He thought women sexuality and all of this distracted you from working on yourself and developing yourself and shouldn't be a part of the teaching. So just like Buddhism, there was that separation. The feminine part was taken out. We have Paul then taking the writings of the disciples, founding the church in Jesus' name. 328 years later, we have the Council of Nicaea rewriting things to serve the empire. Later on, we have the meddlings of the Italian families. And to put a timeline, I would say the Medicis have been traced back as far back to the 500s, but certainly they were active as around the 800s. You have the Pezzo families. The whole transition from the Middle Ages to the Renaissance was basically when the Italians were involved. And then, remember, 1310 is when the Templars came back from the Crusades and were burned at the stake. The Spanish Inquisition, you had the French Inquisition first from the 12th to the 1300s. The Spanish Inquisition becomes active from the 14th to the 1500s. And 1492 is right in the middle of that. The Spanish, of course, rewrote their own version. And then again, it was the most conservative, the most pious, the most fearful, right? Remember, we talked about greed and fear versus love and abundance. For whatever reason, that whole period of time, from Jesus' time on to the modern time, it was fear and greed that was the prevalent. It was the yin energy that was the prevalent, the not having enough. We have to go to war with other nations and get their resources. Ours aren't enough. Instead of working together to come up with new solutions. You know, this would be the other alternative, but during the Middle Ages, during the high shipping times, the merchant times, we weren't there. And then we got the Industrial Revolution and the industrial robber barons and the bankers that grew alongside them. And you see, every age had its system, and it was all about preserving the wealth and preserving the system and keeping it in the system and keeping everybody else serving the system. Spirituality and some of these other teachings that Buddha and Jesus and Mohammed were teaching, they would have been the anarchists, the rebels of the time, because they were teaching you how to be your own system, how to be self-sustaining and self-realized and live outside the system. That's not to say you're against the system. You're not a terrorist. Your goal is not to bring the system down. We all want to make the system better for everybody, don't we? That's not a terrorist. That's not a rebel. That's the most compassionate path you can take in life, and often at great detriment. We're not looking to bring down the system. We're looking to improve the system. But if you're within the system and that's all you know and all you see it as a threat.
Yes, indeed. And what else to talk about here? Okay, we talked a little bit about the tantric thing earlier. You did mention that in passing. One thing that you mentioned on during the little thing that I'm going to edit out before the official show start that I think maybe might as well ask you to elaborate on again. Some people get a little uncomfortable when they hear the word tantric, you said, and here on the website it says where sacred sexuality and spirituality are one. Okay. When it comes to this idea of sexuality and spirituality, one thing I specifically think of is, well, I've heard the thing that it's not a good idea to masturbate. It's better to only ejaculate when you're having true sex, and not anything else is like a waste of the kundalini or possibly other spiritual stuff. I mean, do you agree or disagree with that mentality? And well, after you agree or disagree with that, please elaborate more on why do you say the things about tantric makes people uncomfortable? Why is that? What is it about it?
Well, is it a good idea or a bad idea? It's not so black and white. Tantra also, over time, became a religion and became a system. And just like we talked about, serving itself in its own preservation. You have to realize that. So you have religions that say sex is bad, stay away from it. And then you have Tantra that says, no, sex can aid your spiritual ascension. You know, it's good, engage in it. Just don't have too much fun, just don't ejaculate. You see what I mean? There still has to be a little bit of that church doctrine thrown in because we don't want to look like we're promoting irresponsible behavior. The whole preservation of Jing thing is true to a point. And I can hear people going, oh my gosh, he's about to oppose Mantak Chia. I love Mantak Chia. Read all his books. The exercises in there are amazing. But here again, he gives you some of the tools you need for where you are at to get you to the next step. He doesn't give you all of the tools. If you're just starting out, yeah, okay. His exercises are good and will get you to the next step, but you don't have to stop there. The goal is not never ejaculate, and it's not whether you're by yourself or with a partner. It's how you do it and for what purpose you do it. Yes, most men engage in it too much, to the point that they're draining your energy, and particularly the older you get, the more you need to space it out, because the longer it takes you to recover. But this idea of preserving Jing for a lifetime so you can become this master that floats 2 inches above the ground you walk on is a myth, I'm sorry to say. The body is producing sperm all the time. In order to make room for the new sperm, it has to get rid of the old sperm that are no longer viable, and they stop being viable after about 2 weeks. What doesn't come out through ejaculation will come out through your urine, or it'll come out in the form of nocturnal emissions. Medicine is not all bad. Medicine can teach us a lot. I always say, don't turn your back on modern medicine. They have some of the best diagnostic tools ever invented. Learn what you can from medicine, get the diagnosis, listen to their proposed treatment plan, then go learn everything else and put together your own treatment plan that borrows the best of both worlds. That would be my recommendation. Modern medicine tells us you cannot preserve sperm and therefore Jing for more than 2 weeks. Okay? So certainly people overdo it. Certainly people do it too much. The next step I would say is using it with intention. And this is true, by the way, not just for men, also for women. Energetically, we tend to orgasm down and out. Women get more lubricated, some women squirt, but everybody ejaculates down and out because anatomy follows energy. That's where the energy is flowing, so the fluids follow it. But you can separate the energy from the fluid. And while the fluid goes down, the energy can go up your spine, and you can use it to activate your other chakras. Don't stay down there in the lower two. Now orgasm becomes a way of energizing you instead of draining you. And with men, if you practice this enough, eventually you can also separate orgasm from ejaculation. Imagine having multiple orgasms. You're having more fun, you're lasting longer, you're pleasing your partner more. As your sensitivity increases, you start to feel her own orgasms as if they're your own. People often ask me, teach me some great sex techniques. I really want to please and impress my girlfriend. It's not about the technique. It's about your mental state while you're performing the technique. All of them and none of them. Let's work on your mind. Let's work on your ability to sense and work with energy. That's the key. Then any technique will be useful. Use a variety. But as you do some of these practices and some of these exercises, you will separate orgasm from ejaculation. You can last longer, have more of them. You can increase your sensitivity to where you can feel your partner's orgasms right along with her. Everybody's having twice as many orgasms. Yay! Great. The ejaculation part, adding the fluid to it, is not just a waste. It's creative energy. It's not just for creating life. Orgasm is the most potent time to visualize and do manifestation. This is what we refer to as sex magic, for 2 reasons. Your creative energy is freely flowing out into the universe. Send your intention along with it. The second part that people don't realize, our subconscious mind, and it's not an evil villain, it's just looking to protect us by keeping us in our safe comfort zone. But the anytime you make a New Year's resolution or join a fitness club or start a new business, you're feeling that high, you're feeling great, I'm going to change my life, I'm going to change the world, and then eventually your mind goes to work and starts talking. Who are you to think that? You should set a more reasonable goal. Are you sure that's safe? Are you sure that's reasonable? Boy, won't you be embarrassed when you have to tell your friends you didn't accomplish it. Why rush to tell them in the first place? Keep that energy contained. But the subconscious mind sets in, and in trying to protect us, ends up sabotaging us. The moment of orgasm, your subconscious mind shuts down. This is why the French word for orgasm is la petite mort, the little death. There is no more you there. There's a story of a man coming to Osho and saying, please, great guru, can you help me become enlightened? He looks the man up and down and he says, I'm sorry, sir, I cannot help you become enlightened. And he says, what? I thought you were the greatest guru alive, and why do you refuse to help me? He said, because, dear sir, the nature of enlightenment is that there is no more you. So therefore, there is no way I can help you become enlightened. Come see me when you are ready to let go of you. Orgasm gives us that free pass for a few minutes. And with practice, you can drag it out. My longest orgasm with a partner, I kid you not, is 7 hours, 45 minutes. In a constant state of orgasm, wave after wave after wave together, so you're amplifying it. Doesn't that sound like fun? If you need incentive to start studying some of these arts, there it is. But it's not just about more pleasure. It's through that pleasure, your personal energy becomes more intense, more amplified, and what you can do with that increased energy. I always say in my workshops, Tantra is not just about getting better in the bedroom, so it will certainly teach you that. It's about getting better in all the other areas of your life outside the bedroom as well.
Thank you. And one of the ways that we can enhance our life is to enhance personal alchemy. Let's talk about this, because this is the just like on the Tantric Awakening site, you have the sub thing where sacred sexuality and spirituality are one. On the Jedi Awakening site, the sub thing here is personal alchemy for peak performance. And when it comes to alchemy, one side issue I want to get out to help make sense of this, because I said earlier a lot of people don't really know how to best define alchemy, and I remember Andrew Bartzis, when someone asked him about the chance of what benefits you can get from using Salvia Divinorum, he actually said, certainly not in your best interest to use that unless you are a shaman of the highest order intending to engage in alchemical practices. Then and only then do you have any business doing Salvia Divinorum. I will admit I've actually tried this stuff a couple times, buying the extracted form off the net. I bought the best kind. I figured anything less would be a waste. And they say it's one-hit wonder. Well, the one hit, it's wonder, but it's not pleasurable like you think it is. I mean, it's not a pain or it's not a burden or anything. It's just the effects are like really not worth repeating, because there's better things to do with your life than just have such a wonderful experience that you really can't make sense of. But that's different if you're a shaman practicing alchemy of the highest order, and you're a shaman of the highest order that can practice such. So with that said, does that help make any sense of what alchemy actually is, and what is really meant to the best way you can explain it, that one should not use salvia unless they are a shaman of the highest order? What do you have to do to get to that order?
I've heard it said by a shaman about all medicines, not just salvia. You have to have the training. You have to have the intention. You can use the medicine, and if you don't, it will use you. As far as how much is too much, I heard a podcast recently. It was an interview with a shaman. He's American, but he went down and apprenticed in Peru for about 20 years. He said 12 of those years, he was drinking Aya 3 times a day. For 12 years. And Aya is such a potent psychedelic. We're referring to ayahuasca. And he said, like, after a few years, he was coming down there to the circle with his coffee mug, and they're like, what are you doing? The dose is 3 ounces. That's a 12-ounce cup. He's like, shut up and fill it up. I've got work to do today. He was using it to do intense internal work. That worked for him. I wouldn't necessarily try that. You know, you have to have the intention. You have to do the work to, first of all, have the qualifications to know how to set intention and which intentions are worth pursuing. So definitely do the internal work. At 5D, one of the things we were selling at our booths are these things called Vishnu stones. And if you're interested in that, get in touch with my friend. He's at sacredpendants.com. The Vishnu stones come from the riverbeds of Nepal, and they are known to be a manifestation accelerator. That's not the same as a good luck charm. In fact, everyone who bought one from our booth got a printed disclaimer/instruction sheet with them that points that out. They are not a good luck charm. They are manifestation accelerator. So get clear, do the internal work, and get clear on what it is you want to manifest first, and keep your focus on it unwavering. If you have a bad day, if you're in a bad mood, if you're feeling hopeless, if you're feeling anxiety or feeling depressed, take it off for that day, because my goodness, you wouldn't want to amplify that. You know, the other reason manifestation doesn't work for people, by the way, this is the part that The Secret could have explained a little better. A lot of people try manifestation, doesn't work for them because they spend all their time focusing on what they want. Realize that want means not having. Here again, it's important to know what the words mean. To want is to not have. So you are actually giving energy to the not having of that thing. What you got to focus on is the feeling of gratitude for already having it. Remember, what's the secret? What's the opposite of scarcity and lack? Love, abundance, and gratitude. Feel the feeling of already having. That's what you want to amplify if you want to bring it to your world. Manifestation is not making something appear out of a poof of smoke. That car you want has already been manufactured. You don't have to do that hard work. You just have to attract it to you. That's much easier. But you have to be ready for it. You have to be the kind of person that you feel is worthy of driving that car before you will be allowed to have it. That's how the universe works. You have to work on you. Same for relationships. I tell people, don't go out to bars and clubs and look for the one. You will never find them. You will find people at your present level of development and unhealth is the thing, and you will go to work on fixing each other, and if the relationship works well, you'll hopefully both graduate to the next level. You don't go looking for something outside yourself. You do the work internally to raise your own vibration, your own level of being, and you will attract people at this new level who will be much less work. I'm not knocking the old way, but it'll be work. Why not attract people at a higher level? How do you attract people at a higher level? You raise yourself to a higher level first. So it's always about doing the internal work. And herein comes the alchemy part. Alchemy is transmutation. The most classical definition we think of is turning lead into gold. And there was a lot of interest from the Crown in this for obvious reasons. And here again, when you're an entrepreneur with a new project, you have to pitch that project to your investors in a way that they see profit for themselves from it, if you want to get your project funded. So a lot of alchemists sold this idea of turning base metals into gold, and hey, it'll make you rich, you'll get your investment and then some back. But really what they were working on is self-transmutation. And that's why Jedi Awakening and Tantric Awakening, the taglines are slightly similar but slightly different because there are different paths. Not everybody's ready to deal with the sexual element of it, and that's okay. There are several paths that lead to the same goal. You pick the path that speaks to you. It's about transmutation. I saw a documentary recently about alchemy, and it brought up a very important point. The missing ingredient, and now science is starting to ratify what they used to laugh at, some of these alchemical principles, because they're getting more and more proof that the missing ingredient that they've been ignoring this whole time is the intention of the alchemist. Here again, the double slit experiment. Particles change their behavior according to our presence and our intention. This is how the universe works at the particle level. This isn't mysticism, this is quantum physics. It's not theory, it's been proven and repeated in different laboratories by different teams and published in accredited papers. This is not theory. The universe responds to consciousness at the particle level and changes its behavior according to intent. The hidden ingredient in alchemy was the intention of the alchemist. So yeah, they're mixing together lead as a cure for the flu. Nowadays we're dying from lead paint because we lost the intention. We lost the ability to transmute. But homeopathy and alchemy both look at some of the ingredients. Rattlesnake poison, tarantula poison in some of their tinctures. Homeopathy, people say, a chemist will tell you they don't understand homeopathy because you're diluting things to such a level that there can be no measurable result anymore. There can be no chemical reaction. We're not trying to trigger a chemical reaction. These things work according to energetic imprints. We need enough not to poison you, but enough to leave an energetic imprint so the energy can work on your energy and help tune it in a specific way. Alchemy was meant to be studied in an energetic and intentional level, not at a chemistry level. There are always different layers and different levels. All of reality is an onion. So it's not that things are true versus false. They are true for the layer they are contextually meant to be interpreted and applied from. But they are never the whole. There are always additional layers we can look outside of. Just like your past lives aren't over yet. You just haven't looked there. So it seems like something you call the past to you. You're in one moment.
Yeah, time is very confusing thing for us to make sense of and understand when it comes to understanding how we
Only
are all one, but linear
only
timing.
because we're looking at one layer of it and not looking outside of it.
Well said there. Um, okay, looking at some of the other things here that you've got on your sites and on that are worth talking about. Actually, something I remember you talking about. I probably should have saved this for the beginning of the show because it's not so positive. I like to try to get more positive as the show goes on. But what the presentation that I saw you give, the talk you gave in Los Angeles, the earlier 5D events one before this Vegas one, mentioning about like how to protect yourself from things like EMFs and such. You mentioned, among other things, put your phone on airplane mode if you, or the best thing of all, put some sort of a like an EMF shield on it. I got one on my cell phone, and I always try to keep it in airplane mode whenever I'm asleep or um, not having to talk on it. But one thing that I would like to get some clarification on, because whether or not it's in our best interest to like spend a fortune to protect ourselves with this kind of stuff. I ask that because I had an experience where some of the EMF protection chips and devices that I had bought from some merchants, they were actually disappearing, and I wasn't losing; they were just vanishing. I called the merchant who sold them to me, and his wife, who allegedly has some psychic powers, when she went on the phone, she asserted, I didn't sense anything to suggest she was lying about this. She said my paternal grandfather on the other side was communicating with her and telling her that my guides and angels and whatnot were taking the things from me, among other things, to announce their presence, and also apparently to say, hey, don't waste your money on this stuff. We're here to protect you from the EMF energies, so don't worry about it. Well, can I believe that? Because I actually had my phone checked for to see how much EMF was being radiated from it when I was at a conference in Detroit, and it was at
Uh-huh.
like the high level. And I decided, what harm can it do? I'm going to waste my money on this little chip here to stick on my phone to protect the energies. And well, okay, if the angels and guides do have the ability to protect you from that, how can you be sure that they can protect you? And is there some like limit to how much they can protect you from it? Can you make sense of this?
In your case, if the psychic said you are being protected, that's probably true, but not everybody is protected. Uh, with all of this stuff, here again, what layer of the onion are you on? Those products are very useful, and if you're on the layer where EMFs are acting on you and you haven't learned to transcend your body yet, you had better get some protection, because these devices do bombard us. And, it's only going to get worse when 5G comes out. But realize there's not just one transmitter in there. You've got Wi-Fi, you've got cellular, you've got GPS. There are multiple transmissions going out and back from your phone all the time. How do wireless devices communicate? Well, it's through radiation. They radiate their signal and an antenna picks it up. Realize that. Definitely when you sleep, it should be in airplane mode. You are the most vulnerable, you are the most open when you're sleeping because your spirit is traveling elsewhere. Sleep is your time for the body to detoxify, to rebuild and regenerate. You don't want EMFs interfering with that regenerative process. So definitely turn it off. And here's a much more practical reason to, as well, you don't want to reach for your phone first thing when you wake up in the morning. Because right away from the get-go, your day is going to be about other people steering your agenda and fulfilling other people's needs and requests. Meditate the first 5 to 15 minutes of the morning. When you're sitting there halfway between worlds, that's the best time. Make it a regular practice. Set your alarm a little bit earlier. Spend those first few minutes of each day for yourself and your spirit. Then reach over, turn the phone on, let the messages come in, and deal with what everybody else wants from you and your obligations, but from a much more grounded, centered place. So it's better for yourself, and it's better for your schedule and productivity. Turn that thing off at night. If you have children and you're concerned about them calling you late at night, at least turn off the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth and the GPS. Leave the cellular on. Don't keep the phone next to your head. One transmitter is at least better than 3. But still, don't reach for it first thing in the morning. Take that time for yourself. There are different protection tools for different layers of the reality that you're functioning in and therefore being affected by, Andrew. There are spiritual tools for shielding, how to shield yourself from the Greys reading your mind or the CIA remote viewers reading your mind. There are shielding techniques for shielding out the influence of the reptilians and the draconians. There are shielding techniques from not being fed on by the archons. You know, everything from phones to archons, there are shielding techniques for. Depends on the layer that you find is affecting you that you need protection from. And you're right. You know, one thing I see at a lot of these conventions, they talk about UFOs, they talk about archons, they talk about government conspiracy theories, and it tends to get very negative. We need this information. People need to know, but we shouldn't dwell there and, oh, I'm depressed because, you know, all we're doing is feeding the archons and, you know, we're forever doomed to be slaves of this evil race. Well, you can accept that as your reality, just like there's people that call themselves a rape victim for the rest of their lives. A rape is such a tragic, unfortunate thing. A lot of my work is helping people deal with traumas like that and recover from them. But the point is, you don't have to label yourself that and stay that the rest of your life. And you can become someone who was raped at one point and chose to overcome that. That is also a label you can choose to identify yourself with. So you can call yourself a slave of the archons, or it's hopeless because the dark cabals and the Illuminati control everything. Be aware of this knowledge, but choose not to be enslaved by it. Because remember, it's not about defeating the Illuminati or defeating the reptilians. Their armadas are bigger than ours. It's not about defeating them. You can work on transcending that. That's why in Sanskrit they use terms such as liberation. There are other ways to liberate yourself besides revolution. How about re-lovution? Re-evolution. Both those words are also contained in the word revolution. You know? You can be aware of that stuff. You can take means to protect yourself from it until your consciousness is trained to a level that you can transcend that. Why don't you become an archon as well? Why don't you find out what's beyond the archon? Every puppet master has someone else pulling the strings. Go and have a peek at the next layer. And when you're ready, graduate to the next layer. So absolutely, there's the positive side of all this too. People, you know, ask me, are you afraid of the reptilians? No, not really. They might be able to do something to this body, this lifetime, but in the grand scheme of things, I'm not really afraid of them. They should be afraid of us because here again, hashtag, we have already won. Some of us can see far enough to know that.
Yes. Moving on to another subject here. Want to we got 15 minutes left. Maybe cover a few more things. Tandem meditation. I see on the picture there. This is coming soon stuff on your JediAwakening.com page. Has two people sitting Seiza position with their hands together, a man and a woman. Now, this tandem meditation, this is something I have not really done much. I mean, the position I see them in, a common position in Aikido, where we do a test where one person grabs the other person's wrists and you try to apply force to each other, and then one person will eventually fall back. It's a key test of some sort, usually done to cool off at the end of practice. But this tandem meditation, what is it about this meditation that you see is so worthwhile, and is there significance behind it being a man and a woman? Can it be a homosexual kind, or if you know what I mean? Yeah, okay.
Absolutely. When I teach my Tantra workshops, I have men and women sitting together, women and women sitting together, men and men sitting together. And some of it is done like you see in the picture, just sitting in front of each other. If you want it a little more intimate, you touch knees as well as hands, because that's another point of contact and another point of energy transference. And sometimes people actually sit on each other's laps. The statue of Devi sitting on Shiva's lap is depicted that way. She's actually on him and her laps are wrapped around him. Now your chakras are even closer to each other. Now you're not next to each other's energy fields. You're in each other's energy fields. There's different ways to do it. And I had one workshop that I was teaching, and right in the front row were two gentlemen, and they were doing the full yab-yam position, where the second gentleman's legs were wrapped around him. He was on him, and they were wrapped around him. I was chatting with them after the workshop. Neither of them is gay. They just both wanted to try the exercise with a man and see how it feels different from doing it with a woman. Here again, it's the West that makes this stuff shameful. Let's sexualize everything. I wrote a letter to an editor once. First time in a long time I felt moved to do it, because I read an article about a 15-year-old girl that was pulled out of class and sent to a principal's office because she wasn't wearing a bra under her rather tight-fitting sweatshirt, and it got cold in class and her nipples were showing. So they pulled her out of class and sent her to the principal's office for being inappropriate. And I wrote in and I said, the only thing I find inappropriate is that a 15-year-old girl missed a day of class because of your sexual hang-ups, because I'm sure she wasn't sexualizing it. And you were, which is why it felt inappropriate to you. And she's 15, by the way. That's what I wrote in my letter. So who's the guilty party seeing nipples and thinking it's something sexual that needs to be hidden? Who is really the guilty party here to think of a 15-year-old girl in that way? She doesn't have a problem with her own nipples. You have a problem with her nipples. You're the problem here. I think I've deviated a little bit from your original question. I know we're running low on time, so bring me back, Andrew.
Well, it was basically just a lot of the significance behind the position of the man and the woman like that.
Oh,
with their hands
right.
together.
Yeah, so two people, it's not necessarily sexual. It can be. You can use that energy too, but it isn't always. And even in a sexual context, both men and women, let's not talk about anatomy, let's talk about energy. We both have masculine and feminine energies. There's just sometimes the dominance or more of one. Usually women have more dominance in a feminine energy, but not always. Look at Hillary Clinton. She's one that's very masculine energy. Bill Clinton actually has more feminine energy than she does. That's why he leans more towards the intuitive, more towards the sensual, and that's why he got in trouble back during his presidency. It's not necessarily tied to the body. In gay couples, there will always be one man who is more masculine, one man who is more feminine. If there weren't, there wouldn't be an attraction between them. In lesbian couples, same thing. In straight couples, there will be times when you are both masculine and you butt heads. And there will be times when you are both feminine and there is distance between you. And there will be times when it's the perfect balance of masculine, feminine energies and you feel this intense attraction to each other. So the reason we use two, whether it's sexual or not, is because two is better than one. And in fact, 1 + 1 is not 2, it's 200 when you start to amplify the energy. Remember I said I can bring someone further than a Zen monk in 10 to 30 minutes. And I know that's a pretty bold claim, but I can make it because I'm not going to teach you how to meditate. And you're not going to have to learn how to meditate because those that have tried know it's kind of tricky and it takes a long time. We skip the teaching. I'm going to meditate with you because I already know how. I'm going to take you there. You get to experience what a really deep meditation feels like and learn to navigate in that space, just like when you put a child into a pool. They eventually figure it out and they learn to swim just as like they learn to walk on land. You can learn to navigate this astral space, this energetic space too. You just need to be put in it and held there by somebody who knows how to get you there and get you back out. Once you spend some time there, you will figure it out. You see what I mean? Most of these monasteries and traditions spend their time and often their lifetime getting there. We can skip the getting there part by doing it together. And once you know how to get there and what it's like there, now your real education begins, and it begins at a much faster pace than trying to teach something through their mouth and the ears.
Right. Now, another thing that's on the coming soon, right next to the Tandem meditation picture, energy awareness. Now, this I can relate to this, seeing at the conference we were at on Saturday. It was that was kind of like we had the full moon early Friday morning, and then the full moon exact time, and then like the beginning, like late Sunday going into Monday was the peak of that solar energy that was coming, that Nikki Sutton of Spiritual Awakening YouTube channel was talking about, but I'm sure that was getting beefed up to happen like during the same full moon time. So we were at a pretty energetic time period then, and I could clearly feel it. It was very strange how I really like one of the presentations before the late night panel on Saturday, which I couldn't attend because I ended up falling asleep. But for a little while, I around like 8 o'clock or so, wanted to just lie down because it's funny. I felt fatigued, but then it was not the kind of fatigue which would cause me to yawn or doze off during like a lecture. And when I wanted to lie down, I found myself not able to fall asleep. I mean, I set my alarm for an hour later to go to the conference, the panel that night, but I eventually decided that the energies that I was feeling made it too hard to want to get out of bed, and well, I eventually zonked out and slept pretty well. But this is kind of familiar to that feeling I had when I went to Bermuda for the first time back in 2015, when I did a lot of walking around the island, and I found myself having the most unpleasant ascension symptoms ever and wanted to just lie down, but I couldn't really sleep well. So am I being aware of the energy by the fact that it was having a not necessarily so pleasant effect on me? And I also want to talk about information awareness, because I had a incident where a lot of people have the run-of-the-mill example of this, where you think of someone and then they call you on the phone a minute later. I had a more profound example when I was doing a bank run for my job, went to the Wells Fargo bank, and while the teller was doing my transactions, for whatever reason, I had an image of the bank being robbed. And I don't know where it came from. And I was like, whatever. And then I left the bank, and then I got a text message from a couple people saying, hey, if you were going to do your bank run and you haven't done it yet, don't go. The bank's being robbed. So, and I was like, it's okay. I left. But funny you mentioned that. I actually had a vision of that happening when I was there. Now, that's information awareness. And it's interesting that Einstein, his theory says energy of any form can't travel faster than light, but information can. That's why we have quantum entanglement, spooky action at a distance. So I guess the best question I could have to ask you is, can you maybe compare and contrast information awareness and energy awareness, and what exactly is the energy awareness that you're planning to talk about here when you get this finished on your site?
I mean, you hit the nail on the head. They are one and the same.
Really? Even though Einstein would say that they're different because of the reason I explained, like the speed of light factor. One can't go faster than light, but the other one can.
Energy is how you can receive information from outside your 4 dimensions while you are in the 3rd dimension. Think of it like a carrier wave. It transmits higher dimensional information. So the first step is energy awareness. But eventually, people talk about seeing auras and seeing the light. Light is energy. You do transcend even light itself. People are like, do things just get brighter and brighter and more golden? Yeah, till the point that they go dark. Eventually, you transcend energy and light as well, and you don't need that to be the carrier wave to carry the information. You now graduate to another layer of dealing with the information, and he's very right. It's Einstein was on the right track. Where Einstein erred is he was still involving travel, information going from one place to another, because he's in the 3rd dimension looking out. And I'm not knocking his brilliance in any way, shape, or form, but he was in the 3rd dimension making sense of things looking out. But if you're in the 5th dimension looking in on the 3rd and 4th dimensions, it looks very different. Spooky travel at a distance is only spooky because you're thinking of it in terms of travel. When you're in the 5th dimension, everything we know as space-time and everything we know as history and the future of the 4th dimension is one single point. There is no travel involved. You are seeing 2 ends of the same object. You're just not seeing how they are connected. They seem far apart to you, but you're in the 3rd dimension looking out, not the 5th dimension looking in. So they are the same thing to us at this level from our vantage point. But our vantage point is not the whole truth. We can only see up to the veil and not beyond it. You see what I mean? Like the Tao, like all of these ancient teachings, the true versus untrue is the wrong question. They are true to the territory they are attempting to describe, but they are not describing anything from the outside of the territory looking in. Eventually, information and energy do separate, and there is no travel involved. That's why it goes faster than the speed of light, because it's already there. What happened to you? Congratulations, my friend. You remote viewed across time. When people meditate with me, it's not uncommon for them to see other faces, other shapes, sometimes animals, and you're not hallucinating, you're not fantasizing, you're literally looking across time. You might be looking at one of my past lives. You might be looking at a reflection of your past lives. You might be looking at my spirit animal. You might be looking at one of my guides. You might be looking at one of the alien entities pulling my strings. You never know. We might be our own alien entity pulling our own strings, higher self. But you are starting to see beyond that single point of space-time that you have gotten used to calling now, that you have gotten used to calling the only thing that exists. Because that is as far as your senses, the range of your senses extend. But just like the kid, remember when you were a kid and you thought there was a monster, so you're going to hide under your covers, and if you don't see the monster's not going to see you. It's kind of that thinking. If I can't perceive it with my 5 physical senses, it might not exist. This must be the whole of reality. No, more exists. You can widen your senses to perceive more of it, just like some people hear a dog whistle when other people aren't supposed to. It's supposed to be outside our auditory spectrum. Well, like any muscle, you can increase your auditory, you can increase your visual, you can increase your sense, your feeling, your intuitive. Just because this is the range you receive does not mean that's all there is. Just like a radio, you can turn your dial and change your frequency. You're not moving the radio to a different room. You're not changing radios. You're just changing its frequency, and a new sort of signal starts to come in, which changes the mood of the whole room around it, right? Because this is the other part too, and I think this is a good note to end on, Andrew. We're not just working on ourselves. I'm obsessed with working on myself, but my mission is not selfish. As we work on ourselves, we make the world a better place because we're all co-creating this reality together. That's the key. We're improving the experience for everyone by committing to our own personal journey. The HeartMath Institute talks about this. First, we got to get the brain-heart cohesion going so we are no longer in conflict. Left brain, right brain, but then get out of the brain completely and get the cohesion between brain and heart. Once you've got that, you can create more cohesion in your immediate sphere, interpersonal cohesion. This is where you get into some of the realms of Tantra. There's a lot of masters that say Tantra is kindergarten. That's where you begin. That's not the ultimate teaching. Then you get into transpersonal coherence. Because all of our emotions are energy too. All of our emotions, we're constantly radiating out. If you're wondering why there's more hurricanes, why they're more intense, more earthquakes, more tsunamis, climate change is a part of it, but here again, it's not the whole story. It's the part we're able to perceive. And which is it? Is it man-made or is it solar cycles? It's both. So let's end the debate and focus on how to survive and thrive in the coming future. Part of it is climate change, but part of it, I'm convinced, is energy and emotion. We live in a world of turmoil and turbulent emotions. That's why our weather is getting more turbulent. But it doesn't have to be that way. We can consciously start to shift first our own energies and then the energies around us. And yes, there are some perks to this. Like you said, energy awareness, information awareness, receiving information. You were warned not to go to that bank. I often reach for my phone a few seconds before it rings. I often look down the aisle of a store just in time to see somebody drop something or, trip and fall. And for a while I was scared. I'm like, am I doing that? Am I like bad luck? Should I not make eye contact with people? No. And it's just you're seeing a few seconds ahead, like the ninja of Japan said. You're not fixed in this point in space-time just because that's all you're able to perceive. It's time that we broadened our view and our understanding of the universe at large.
Indeed. And with that said, we've almost reached the 2-hour limit, so I'll give you a chance now. Get at anything you like and plug your websites, plug your contact info. When do you expect to have the websites up and running and all that, and also the zpoint.org site that I told you about that I tried. It was on your card, but I went there and it's there's no it says no domain name's not there. So if you can again maybe recap what that was about. So let's close this out here.
Yeah, Z Point is Zenith Point. That was a retreat that I was working on building in Malibu that we unfortunately lost to the Woozley fires last year. So that's why that was not active. I decided. Eventually, I would love to see a training center, a retreat center, and I'm very actively working towards that. But right now, I got that message. I'm moving online. I want to reach a wider audience than perhaps are just able to travel to train with me directly. Or, I travel a lot, which is why the progress on the websites has been slower than I would like lately. Almost every weekend I'm at another conference right now. It's that season, just doing what I can to put that information out there. But get on the mailing list. We'll keep you in touch. We plan to do workshops. We plan to do retreats. I'll give you a schedule of when I'm coming to your city. But failing that, let's use this awesome technology that we find ourselves living in. I remember when the internet first went online and opened to the public, the first website I went to was the Louvre because I've always wanted to go there. Always these Templar ties to France. And I had never been there at the time. I've visited several times since, but, you know, that was the first website I went to, and it was such an amazing concept that I can see another part of the world remotely. It was mind-blowing. We didn't have this stuff 20 years ago. You guys, we live in such an amazing age, so let's use it. That's why Tantric Awakening, Jedi Awakening, whichever one calls to you, go to both. Sign up, and I'll keep you plugged in. We're going to start doing stuff online, both classes, one-on-one sessions, videos that you can watch on your own time. I'm just going to get this information out there every which way I can to make sure that people have access to it. It's Jedi, D-J-E-D-I, awakening.com. Tantric Awakening is .net, okay? I didn't want that one to feel commercial. I really wanted it to feel more like network, like connecting with people. So Tantric Awakening is .net, or you can search for either or both Tantric Awakening, Jedi Awakening on Facebook. We've got discussion groups for both, so you can certainly get in touch and message me through there. And whether you choose to do it with me or someone else, I just want to say, start your quest today, because
Good
it's
advice.
an exciting journey. It's an exciting journey, my friend.
Yes. Are you going to be a contact in the desert? That's my next conference.
I will absolutely be a contact in the desert. I'm headed next to Conscious Living Expo in San Mateo, which is just south of San Francisco. I'll be there this coming weekend. I will be at Contact in the Desert. I'm also going to be at Alien Con and Portal to Ascension. Those are the ones that have been confirmed so far.
I'll be at both of them too. Alien Con in Los Angeles on the summer solstice, not the one that's in Dallas, because the one
Correct.
in Dallas is at the same time as Portal to Ascension, and I feel really sorry for Neil there. That's kind of a David versus Goliath kind of thing, where he is the David and Alien Con's the Goliath conference. He may lose a potential audience because more people may want to go to the Goliath conference. Right. I did send him an email to tell him that, and hopefully maybe he can do something to solicit some guests and audience members to come to his conference instead. So
his is amazing. If you're going to be on the West Coast at that time, I highly recommend going. The information I heard imparted there was second to none. Really amazing conference last year, and I'm hoping for the same this year. In my case, yeah, it was a tough choice, but I had already committed to Portal to Ascension, and Templar Knights always keep their commitments. So I'm going to be at that one, and happy to be there again.
All right. See you there. All right. Take care. Thank you for coming on my show. Namaste, my friend, and good luck.
Thank you for doing this show. It was awesome.
Awesome. Take care. Bye-bye.